Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everyone and welcome to the Behavioral View. This is episode 2.5 and we are here today with Karin Torsiello. Before I introduce Karin Torsiello, I guess I should say who we are. Hi, I'm Shannon Hill, Editor-in-Chief at the CentralReach Institute. Nissa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nissa Van Etten, and I'm the Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training at the CentralReach Institute.
And we have, as always...
I'm Karin Torsiello.
My mind,
I'm the Director of Clinical Programming
at CentralReach.
Yep.
Right? Yep. All right. So, Karin, your job title I see is President of Behavior Basics Incorporated. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Behavior Basics?
Sure. First of all, it was a pleasure meeting you ladies, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your chat today. I'm excited. Behavior Basics is a medium-sized company in South Florida, a little bit into Central Florida. We provide behavior analysis services to children with a variety of special needs and mental health diagnoses. And we also provide parent education programs, largely focused in the child welfare population and with parents who have significant mental health and substance abuse histories or current disorders, impairing their ability to safely parent their children. So that's us in a nutshell.
That's great. And you're a BCBA?
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that you should also put into your bio for now and forever that you're the greatest sport on earth. And the reason I say that is that we originally met Karin at ABAI, and I went to her session because I am always looking for people who are using behavior analysis in populations other than autism. And I was drawn to the description, and then I came in and I heard you speak, and I just thought the information you were sharing was wonderful. So I invited you to come to our live episode from ABAI, where I immediately forgot or messed up. I didn't forget. I messed up the technical piece, and we had no audio to your recording. So you've already done this with us once, and you have agreed to do it again. And I just want to say thank you for bearing with us and being willing to come back and do this one more time.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So let's just kind of launch in a little bit about how you guys first got started with working with this different population through behavior analysis.
Okay. Well, actually, it started right at the beginning of my career. I was in graduate school at Florida Tech, and Dr. Jose Martinez Diaz was the dean of our school, and he was my main professor. And as we were approaching graduation, he said to me, the state of Florida is starting a unique program in child welfare focusing on keeping children with severe trauma history and mental health disorders that are in foster care out of deep end residential placement. So that was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when a large number of children were ending up in psychiatric facilities for 9 to 24 months at a time, which comes with its own unique set of challenges. So the state of Florida decided to hire 60 behavior analysts statewide to work on the behavior analysis services project. And we partnered with the University of Florida and the University of South Florida. So I was very excited about that opportunity. So I applied to work for that program and fortunately was hired and began working there in 2001. So, gosh, we did a whole bunch of things that were weird and wonky and outside of our job description. I mean, we trained foster parents, we trained adoptive parents, we trained lawyers, we trained police officers, we trained anybody who would listen to us talk about how to safely and effectively interact with a child that has a variety of special needs and how to work to de-escalate them versus escalate a situation, to need a Baker Act or a crisis stabilization, which would ultimately back then would easily land a child in a psychiatric facility. We also hunted missing children. That was fun. At that point, you work at the mercy of the governor. And if the governor says, everybody go do this, that's what you go do. So we did go look for missing children. So that was interesting use of our skills at that point. And then...
Wait a minute. What do you mean? How did you go look for missing children?
Listen, it was like 2001 to 2003. So I don't even think we had smartphones yet. So we each got a list of children and we had to go verify that, well, we weren't the only ones. Everybody who worked under the Department of Children and Families had to do it. We each got a list of children and we'd have to go out to their last known address, verify that the child was present and living in that home environment with who, and make sure that they were safe, healthy, and whole. So we drove around in our cars and did that.
I think it's interesting because I feel like people ought to know that what you go to school for isn't necessarily what all the skills that you're going to need when you get into the field.
Well, the good news, the positive outcome was obviously we accounted for all the children, so that was good. But we also got to build relationships and make connections with everybody whose door we knocked on, because that's awkward to have a stranger show up on your doorstep. But we met tons of foster parents that we hadn't previously interacted with, so that was really great. We established, what is behavior analysis? Because in the early 2000s, it wasn't such a well-known field. I mean, we used to go to meetings with people who are mental health practitioners or case managers in child welfare, and they'd say, what are you doing? I thought you just worked with salivating dogs. And that was really how we were received, out the gate, which was, we were young, so it was very upsetting for us because we just, did a whole master's degree and all the studying to be, demeaned like that. But what it was a good jumping off point for us to explore all of the educational needs in our system of care and the community in which we worked that people don't understand who we are and what we do. So it opened larger conversations about the value that we could bring to this community. And so sorry, go ahead.
Were you getting that from other professionals or you were getting that from service recipients?
No, from the professionals.
Wow.
The service recipients were happy to have us, anybody else who could come in and offer assistance, a sympathetic ear, somebody to understand their plight or their challenges. They loved it. We were very well received by the caregivers and the children. It was the other service providers, and I can speculate as to why, but part of it was, just misinformed, not fully educated at the scope of our practice and applicability. And maybe there was some feelings of we're encroaching on their territory or we might be threatening, where they stand. But all in all, we did that for 8 years and we ebbed and flowed and morphed into different aspects of behavior analysts, and we learned a lot. And in 2008, the state of Florida was privatizing child welfare. So the funding that they were offering to the universities to fund our program was pulled back into the state, bank, I guess. I don't know. They took the money back and they said to each region in Florida that privatized, we're going to give you all this slice of money and you can decide what to do with it. If you want to hire your behavior analyst team to work under your agency, then go ahead and do that, or you can take that money and do something else with it. My team and I were very fortunate that we had, Behavior Basics was already in existence as a private company. And so the agencies that we'd built relationships with for 8 years opted to hire us, directly to continue providing the service. And over the course of, the first few years of doing that, not only did we provide behavior analysis services to individual children, but they asked us to develop a parent education program specific to restoring protective capacities of parents who had abused their children, and work towards providing stability in those homes because the parents had learned the skills to safely manage their children. That was in about 2011 that we launched our pilot program. And since then, it's been 11 years now. We now have 5 parent education programs that we administer and provide to our community.
Karin, can you go into detail? What is restoring protective capacities?
Okay, so when somebody, and this may be unique to Florida, but those are the terms that we use. But what
is that, like a legal term? That's like
yes.
written in like statute or something?
Yes, and it's also part of an assessment. So when a protective investigator, they're called child protective investigators, receive an abuse call, they go out and begin an investigation. As a course of that investigation, the parent who is the perpetrator of the allegation is evaluated for their protective capacity. So it's a full-blown risk assessment, and it's called a family functioning assessment that is done on the parent and the family at whole. So they're looking at what are the risk factors for abuse in that person's history and what is presenting now. And it's quite astonishing how much information these folks can gather. I mean, I'm very impressed. I feel like they're little mini FBI agents, just collecting information, and they're really, they have like a full blanket authorization to get all kinds of confidential information so that they can keep the kids safe. And so they're really looking at, I'm going to just bring up on the side so I can talk about it. The protective capacities that we look at in Florida there's 3 headings. One is emotional. So is the parent able to meet their own emotional needs first, be mature and emotionally intelligent? Are they resilient? Are they tolerant? Are they sensitive? Do they recognize the needs of their child? Then they look at behavioral as the next component. So behaviorally, do they have impulse control? Do they set aside their own needs for that of the child? So some of this obviously I know is kind of subjective. It's not as behavior analytic as we might like it to be. But we take that on our side. They want to know if the person is able to protect their child. Do they recognize what a danger threat is, and can they mitigate that in the future moving forward, or perhaps with some education? And then lastly, they look at the person's cognitive abilities. So are they self-aware? Are they intellectually able to do the things that are necessary to protect their child? Do they understand what being protective means, and can they work to articulate and enact a plan moving forward to protect their child? So that's kind of what they are looking at in their assessment, and then we bring those results into our treatment plans and assessments, and then our staff do comment on the deficiencies that were found at the end of each month and report on that based on our interactions.
You guys don't do that assessment, so you may not know the answer to this question, and that is fine. But I'm curious about whether people who have high cognitive capacity are very good at hiding the emotional and behavioral components. Is that easy for them to assess? Do we get valid and reliable information there?
I can't comment on valid and reliable. I can put my own opinion on it in that no. These folks have a maximum of 60 days to conduct a full 360-degree assessment of a family. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that they're super accurate. However, they put service providers like us in place to then monitor the family for months and months and months after an investigation. So we become, not just us, other providers too, become very enmeshed and familiar with the family. And so there's cross communication that is allowed. It's not protected by HIPAA, so that we can have an ongoing dialogue. And we do meet with all the other providers in a case on a weekly basis. And we do talk about any issues or additional concerns that we have. So no, I don't think the initial assessment is everything, but I think it's a good jumping off point to give service providers, some more insight and information.
And then you all can drill down.
Yes, absolutely. And each provider, especially since nationally we're moving towards evidence-based practice, for parent education. That's a national law now. So all service providers really have to have good pre and post assessment measures, and those that are ongoing. So we're definitely seeing things in child welfare today that we absolutely would have never fathomed being able to see 20 years ago. So it's great. I mean, things are definitely progressing.
Are there
I have a quick question. For BCBA, you know, and Shannon touched on this a bit, BCBAs who are looking for experiences beyond working in autism service, how would one get into this realm of work and receive training?
now? Yeah, this is different in 2000, right?
Right. Well, you know, there's really not a lot of research, and there are not a lot of practitioners in our country that do this work. So we get a lot of emails and phone calls from people around the world that are interested. And if they do, you know, search, our names will come up, or some of the work that we've done in the state of Florida. So what we do is try to help those people understand how to navigate their systems of care or how to get their foot in the door. I'm currently working with some folks in New York State to try to see how they can navigate this, or if my team's able to go up and physically help them. But it's a hard sell, because a person would have to understand more than just, hey, I've got this great thing I want to show you, because the system of care is huge. So you have to understand, what are the motivating operations in place for each state or each circuit or county in that state, and how does their whole system of care work? So you really have to look at it from a very macro level first, and then find the areas where you can convince somebody that you will have influence and help them, you know, contact the reinforcement they're looking for. So it's a long, tedious process.
And I'm sure
I
it's
was
like
going to ask you
so
for
much
a really
logistics. There's like logistics on who do you talk to in your state? What are the laws that are surrounding this that you have to work under? Like, you know, because you've identified so many moving pieces of agencies that you collaborate with, it was just like, which one of these would I even like pitch to even talk about this service? And every state is different. So I'm sure, like, while you are so fluent in that, you're like, okay, so do you have something like this in New York? Or do you have something, we have this in Florida. Do you guys, what is it like there? Like, at least, you know, like potential setups. Like, I feel like this is an area where without guidance, people could be shooting in the dark and be like spinning their wheels and wasting a lot of time, not knowing even who to talk to.
Right. So step one is kind of like an organizational chart. Like, how does child welfare run? What's the business model? Because essentially it's a business. So you have to understand business, and you have to understand how that flow goes. You're not talking to the CEO, that's outside their wheelhouse, but maybe somebody who's in charge of operations, somebody who's in charge of clinical outcomes. Every state has a dashboard or outcome measures that each administrator of child welfare services is responsible to answer to. So step one would be understanding what people's job roles or job descriptions are, and then building relationships. So finding people who might know people that you can get a foot in the door with, or somebody who's been with an agency for 10 plus years, because they know a lot. When you're in it, you just know stuff. And so those are the people, and it takes a while. And then once you can get an audience, that's when you start bringing your data and you say, this is what I can do. First, let me tell you, this is how much money I can save you. That's usually big. That's very motivating to people, is how are you going to save me money? What's the value add of your proposition to my, you know, organization?
Secret word number 1, team.
And do you want to throw those numbers out just because they're so impressive now?
They really are. So, you know, I'm a behavior analyst. I mean, obviously I've been running a business for a while now, so I obviously know how to run a business and I understand finances. So the agency that we work with in Florida, we've worked with these people, like the human beings that work there, for 20 years, you know? So we have very good relationships. So a number of years ago, we were giving a presentation at the WEBA conference, very similar to the one that we did at ABAI. And I went to our director of contracts and I said, listen, can you get me any financial information to back these claims that I'm making. And so she went and did the math, because I also felt like it would be perhaps subjective if I were the one doing the math. So she did the math. And I can only speak for Florida. So we pay in Florida a monthly board rate for a child in foster care is approximately $500 a month. That's just for a regular foster home. Then you look at group care, $3,600 a month. Now, if you're going to look at deep end residential placement, it's $80,000 a month. We determined that based on the kids that we service, the average out-of-home cost is about $2,800 a month per child. The case management cost for that one child is $4,200 a year, which isn't so bad. There are other costs involved that we didn't even bother drilling down because they're so big, is the legal fees, the legal departments, mental health services, special evaluations, after school care, gifts, clothing vouchers, food stipends, school information, this, that, and the other thing. And so when you break it all down, you're looking at the cost per child is approximately $30,000 per year to be in out-of-home care. And remember, you're pulled into out-of-home care when your family home isn't safe, where you're likely to be re-abused. So you come into foster care. The average length of stay in foster care or out-of-home placement where I work is about $50,000 over an 18-month period. That's the average length of stay. When you look at the cost of our main program, the one that we're talking about today, Refocusing the Modern Family, that program costs $215 per child and $1,000 per adult. So you're looking at approximately $1,300 per family to participate in our program. So we looked at fiscal years 14, 15, 16, 17. So over the course of 4 years, when we did this evaluation, we serviced just over 1,900 children and 800 parents. We determined that the savings cost, if all those 1,900 children came into foster care, which realistically they wouldn't anyway, but if they did, it would have cost the state $62 million over 4 years to take care of those children in out-of-home care. What they paid us over the period of those 4 years was $400,000 a year times 4. So $1.6 million total, right? So 62 million, if I put my hand, we'll go all the way up here. So that is a significant cost savings. And this is why every year they give us a little bit more money. They add, positions to our roster so we can service more people and more families, because ultimately what we found was the recidivism rates in Florida were one number, and then in our region that we service, we were less than half. So our recidivism rates were less than half of the rest of the state of Florida. So I mean, that's your data.
That's really beautiful data. I want to make sure that I fully understand your service model, though. Are you going into homes where they're at risk for losing their children, or where the children have already been removed?
Both. So there are safety determinations that come through. So there are, pending the outcomes of a child abuse investigation, there can be a determination that says the family is currently safe. Like, we've done an emergency mitigation of the risk factors. They're currently safe, but they're at high risk for reabuse in the future. Or they're safe, but they're at very high risk for reabuse in the future. Or the third time that we would get involved is the children have been removed, but we believe the protective capacities can be restored for the children to reunify with the parents. So we work with all three of those. Now, a family that might be in crisis or have egregious abuse, that's not us. That's a different program that would work with the family until their risk levels brought back down, and then they would come to us.
Are there ever times where you're like, they should be in that category and not with us?
Yes, sometimes. I would honestly say not too often, mostly because our system of care, I think, is unique. The people, it's about the people. We've all been working together for 20 years, and I think we all have very good intentions and understanding, and empathy. So I think that's important. And there's big communication. So the way that referrals are vetted, it's vetted by multiple people and multiple agencies before it lands with a provider. And so we do the final review of every case, and we either accept it because we think it fits well with our program, or there are times that we say, no, this person needs to go through other services before they're ready to accept what we have to provide them to.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys ever work with the foster family with like the same type of model?
Absolutely.
That's
so
okay.
Yes. So sometimes the child welfare agency would send us a pre-adoptive family or even a foster family that is really struggling, and they don't necessarily need behavior analysis one-on-one with the child, but they need the parenting component, so they will ask us to do that. Now, as part of our parent education portion of our ABA therapy services, if we're working with a family where caregiver training needs to occur outside of just the behavior intervention plan, it just needs to be more general parent education. Our staff are all trained, all of our behavior analysts are trained in this model and can implement those strategies and the curriculum with those families as well.
I'm curious about what the criteria are for you guys in terms of deciding which families you're going to accept.
Okay, so it depends because we have several different programs. So our Refocusing the Modern Family program, which is the one that I presented on, for that we want people to be not actively engaged in substance abuse, so they're clean and sober. Actively in treatment is fine. If they have severe mental health presenting issues, that they are in therapy and getting assistance for that, and that they live in a stable environment. So they're not living in their car, they're not living at the park, like they're in some type of a home, whether, it could be their own home or with a caregiver or a friend. So as long as they're basically stable and can accept us, we'll work with them. Now, for those people who have severe mental health issues or substance abuse issues that are current and ongoing and not under control, those would be kicked over to one of our other programs where we do a more intensive and less curriculum structured intervention. And for that, we have a behavior analyst that actually consults directly on that case with the parenting coach that works with the family. And they have an individualized treatment plan that will incorporate, of course, the parenting education piece, but it also, we do what you might consider like behavior analysis interventions for them, for their mental health, for their substance abuse issues. So we come up with treatment plans specific to that.
Wait a minute. I want to underscore that you guys are treating the substance abuse problem. You are treating the mental health problem through behavior analysis. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's, I guess we'll just take a left turn real quick. I'll explain all about that. So, gosh, I want to say back in maybe 2008, where we live, the public defender's office started a new program called Reentry. And by the time they got it up and going, it was around 2012. Well, the person that managed us when we were under the Department of Children and Families, under the behavior analysis program that I spoke about earlier, our direct supervisor or contact there was also a behavior analyst, interestingly enough. He never practiced, but he had the credential. So he worked very closely with the public defender's office. And when they opened the reentry program, he suggested that we were hired and brought on to go work in the reentry program. So myself and Angelique and Paula, who you also met, we used to go into the jail with the people who had substance abuse and mental health problems, and that was related to the crime that they committed. So through assessment, they were determined that perhaps if they didn't have these presenting issues, they may not have committed this crime. So they got to go into the reentry pod in the jail. So they had one for the men and one for the women, obviously separate. And we would go into their pods and we would train them on, initially we were there to train them on parenting education for when they left jail and reunited with their children. What uncovered during the 6 or 8 years that we did that is that we could really have a lot bigger impact if we helped them navigate their history leading up to their substance abuse or their mental health presentation. So through that work, we kind of created interventions for people like that. And they're very individualized, obviously, but a lot of it is self-monitoring, creating schedules, keeping yourself busy, finding incompatible or alternative behaviors. And so those are the programs that we run. And that's kind of what we assess. Like, why are you engaging in substance abuse? Kind of like, what's the history or what's the antecedent? What does your substance abuse look like? Around who, when, where, historically, what did that look like? Or how did that shape up to what it is today? And then how can we change the consequence? Or how can we change the behavior so you come in contact with a different consequence that you want? So yeah, that's kind of cool. And then the mental health piece, you know, when you're working with adults who have their own, you know, significant history of trauma or sexual abuse, traditional therapy isn't always a fast enough resolution for what these folks need to be able to get their family like reunited and stable. Like, they don't have 12 months. They need to do it right now. So if we can expedite the behavior change component, they can process through a little bit more quickly.
Do you have outcomes data parsed out for this program versus the other program?
We do. We have lots of data. We just don't really present on it because it's hard to aggregate that into group data, because it's more like, you know, ABA for individual kids. It's very case by case. Whereas the program that I did present on is more large group. They're all getting the same treatment, so that's easier to present on.
But overall, do you think are you having good effects? Is the recidivism rate lower, that sort of thing, with that group as well?
That group is much more challenging. I would say we're probably closer to 60 or 70% success than the people that we work with in the RMF program that stay. We're like 98 to 100% success across all measures. So people who have the more significant presenting issues are much harder to treat.
Sure.
Yeah. And then our last program is called Safe Care, which I'm sure plenty of people have heard of. It's out of Georgia State University. Dr. Lutzker was the founder of that program. And how I found Safe Care was doing a CEU training through Florida Tech, like back in 2015. And of course, it said something about child welfare, and it was 10 CEUs. And I was like, hot dog, I just hit the jackpot. I'm taking this class. So it was fantastic. I just absolutely fell in love with everything he was saying. I love the program. And I tried to convince our system of care locally from 2015, the day I finished that class, for 3 years. Can you guys get the funding? Can we please bring this into Florida? Can we get trained? It's an amazing program, this and that. So finally, a grant opportunity opened up. I'm not a nonprofit, so I had to partner with another agency that is a nonprofit so we could apply, because that was one of the stipulations of the grant. And we won the bid for that project, and we got funding, and we are the first, and I think currently only, site in Florida to prevent safe care to our community. So it's up and running in 3 of 4 counties where we currently provide this type of service. And we focus that program if their family has a child from the age of 0 to 5 and the children are in home. So to go back to how do you determine when you get a referral what to do with it, those are our programs that we look at the referral and decide, can they fall into one of those categories, or no, you know, it's beyond any of our programs, and then we would refer out to a different provider.
Okay, great. I feel like you guys have done a really good job of like taking a problem as an opportunity and trying to decide what can we do rather than how can't we, you know? So hats off to you for that. I will be honest. I probably said this the first time we did this interview. I've lost more sleep at night over kids in unstable home environments and kids in foster care than anything that I've done with kids who have developmental disabilities and don't have that track of issues going on. So I find myself so thirsty. I just want to let you talk. And normally we're jumping in and sharing stories and all. And I'm like, tell me more. I want to know more about this. How do you think your parenting program or your approach to teaching parenting skills is different from the curricula that most behavior analysts may be familiar with?
Well, I actually want to maybe rephrase that question. When you look at child welfare, and when we all kind of started working, they would use a lot of curriculum or pamphlets or handouts that would say, here's how you potty train your child, or here's how you manage a tantrum, or here's how you do 1, 2, 3 magic, or here's how you put a kid in timeout. But there was no like formal training or behavior skills training. So we would get people in a class and we would be teaching them, how to manage behavior using behavior analysis, but not using those words because they didn't understand those words. So we have our own curriculum where we relabeled stuff. And they'd be like, cool, but if you don't come home and like show us how to do it, we don't know what we're doing. So of course we have lots of role play in our curriculum. We do it in the home with them. So we're in their environment. We have sessions where we're alone with the parent. It's called training. We use video models. So we have a DVD series that we use as part of our training that we created and produced. And each of those modules or lessons has stopping points where they watch a clip, then they stop, they process and discuss with the coach, then they role play and practice each step of the skill. So each skill that is trained has discrete steps that they must follow in a certain order that we check off and give them feedback on. After they learn that lesson and they role play and they have to test out at 100% in a novel role play situation, then the next session, their children are home with them. And we call ourselves a fly on the wall. We're just sitting back here watching what's happening. And we want to see you utilize the skill we taught you last week X number of times at 100% competency. So we observe the family, and then after they use the skill, we pull them aside and we give them coaching and feedback. You did great on step 1. On step 2, I saw you attempt this, but I'd like to see you do it this way instead. And we have a little coaching session, and then we send them back to their family and they do it again. And they have to use that skill 2 times with no coaching at 100% on the checkoff sheet before we will let them pass that skill. And so we do that for all of the lessons. We also do a pre-test before they train at all. So our intake session, part of that is a pre-test where they're given novel situations they've had no training on, our expectations. And then we use those same scenarios 13 weeks later when they post-test out of the training altogether.
Is that I'm sorry, is that written or is that role play?
Well, we do both. We have a written one because people like that. And then we have the role play one.
Okay.
And then we also do the parenting stress index, or the parental stress scale, where we measure parental stress because parental stress is a huge indicator, especially for physical abuse of children. So we do that as well. We also measure interactions. So we measure positive and negative interaction data. On initial session, we capture that data every session where the children are present, including the final session, so that we have that outcome data as well. And we also measure.
I want to ask a question about that, but I think this is trying to get a question.
I have two quick questions. One was, how many hours per week are parents receiving that type of training?
The training
for those 13 weeks.
Yeah, it could be anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. It depends on their receptivity or how quickly they catch on and are able to demonstrate the skill. So we don't necessarily have a time limit. And if we only schedule them for 1.5 hours this week and they didn't get it, we just continue that session the following week. So sometimes it's longer than 3 weeks or 16 weeks. It just 13 weeks, golly. So sometimes it's longer. It just kind of depends on the person.
And then when you're going in, are parents, is this a mandated part of the training process, or is this kind of, the initial parent training meetings are building that rapport, getting them kind of invested in what training will look like?
Right. So sometimes this is a court ordered, meaning you have a case plan and you have to do this task if you want to get Department of Children and Families out of your life. Other times, it's not mandated. It's just highly recommended by the department. And so then that's on our staff to get their foot in the door and engage the participant. So we are very well trained at building relationships. And sometimes we're really successful at that. If we can get our foot in the door, and it's like a sales call. If you can get them to whatever sentence, you've got a customer. So we kind of do that. And then for those families that we just can't even get on the line or we can't engage at all, then we'll partner with the investigator or the case manager, and we go out to the home together and try to, build that relationship. But we sell it as, you've had this, uncomfortable and frustrating situation come into your life with the Department of Children and Families. We want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So we've been very successful at presenting this training and having people participate, and then they don't get involvement with DCF moving forward because they learn how to, keep their family safe. So we have a few tips and tricks to get people to want to engage in the program.
Secret word number 2, 13.
Great.
When you say well-trained, you guys are well-trained in relationship building. What's that training? We need that on a widespread basis.
So one of the skills that we actually teach the parents, it's like the foundation skill, is building a relationship. So for us behavior analysts, it's all the soft skills that we never learned in graduate school. I mean, maybe these days they're working on teaching it, but when we came out, I'm talking about my core team that, we've worked together this whole time. When we came out of graduate school, we were very like gung-ho. We know everything. We have the best science in the world. And we're just going to come at you like charging a ram through your door. We'll solve all your problems, right? You just need to listen to us. Well, shockingly, the real world doesn't really love that approach. So what we learned, we actually were trained by Mike Stoutermore and Terry Rogers, who both used to be behavior analysts in the state of Florida, and kind of pioneered the behavior analysis program. So they trained us on the steps to essentially building a relationship. And so we refined that and changed it for our curriculum. And that's basically how you build a relationship with anybody. So, the first thing, it's like pairing, right? But you give empathy statements, you find a way to connect. We always say connect and collect. So you connect with someone and collect information on what makes them happy, what's their reinforcement, what things are they interested in, what do they love, and do they have a small problem that we can help them fix really quick so that we can get that buy-in. Asking open-ended questions. Now I'm going to tell you something. Interestingly, we found that behavior analysts and people in general are not really well equipped to label what an empathy statement is and then deliver it appropriately. And then asking open-ended questions, they get very stuck. So we have a big pool of student analysts that work for us, and master students, and then younger behavior analysts. So just, 1 or 2 years out of graduate school. And one of our students who is an OBM student, he was doing a research study on the soft skills, basically, and like the supervisor giving feedback to the RBT and getting it back. And it revealed, plain as day, y'all lack all the soft skills. There's one that's there. So it's a lot of that training, and it requires a lot of rehearsal. I mean, I was horrible at it, like horrible back in 2000 when I first got trained. I think I got like an F on my pretest. It was like, so embarrassing. Because you're in a room full of like 60 or 80 people and you're like, oh, you got a big fat 0. But, if you don't fail and you don't understand or see what your mistakes are, you can never improve on them. So that's kind of what we really work on. And then we always have the program supervisor do joint visits. So on our parenting programs, we're always collecting IOA data throughout the course of treatment, so that our people who are delivering the service are always getting feedback and kind of preventing any trainer drift and making sure the fidelity is very tight across all of our programs.
I would just can I come watch? I want to see it happen.
Yes, absolutely.
That's how I get people to let me do things. I bring them on, put them on camera, invite myself, their lives. Yeah.
You're like, you said it on camera. I saw you.
Let me show you. Now, my question that I had was related to your assessment of interactions as positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that always sounds great, but then every time I try it, it's so hard.
So much gray.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to always start with a very clean and clear definition of what's going to be positive, what's going to be negative, and what's going to be neutral. We don't use the neutral in our data. They might code it, but we don't analyze it. So for positive interactions, we're looking at voice tone, body language, facial expressions, which are all part of our building relationship skills checklist anyway. And then we're looking at what are the words that were used and when was it applied. So was it applied after a behavior? Was it applied before behavior? Because then we can take that information and teach softly and gently about antecedents and consequences without using those words. And if it was a negative interaction, again, was it before? Was it after? What was the volume? What was the tone of your voice? What did your face look like? What was your body doing? Because all of that nonverbal body language is very interpreted by your listener. So we use that as a teaching. And so that's all defined per participant, and they take their notes on what they observed. What did that look like? So then they can check with their supervisor, like, would you agree this should be coded as a plus? Would you think that this should be coded as a minus? And that's kind of how we drill that down. And then we can use that information to go back and teach the participant, excuse me, this is what we saw. This is how we'd like to see it do differently. Let's practice what that might look like. And so sometimes we take on the role of the parent. So now we're going to act like you acted. You be the child. I'm going to be you. And then how does that feel? And so that's
great. I'm curious though, you're in Florida, so I'm assuming you probably have a pretty diverse array of service recipients. Does the just even the ratings of positive and negative change based on cultural experiences of the recipients?
So what's interesting is, yes, so there are some cultures that are very opposed to certain things that we're teaching. Our perspective on that is it's our job to kind of meet them in the middle, and for those people, it might just be a longer process to get them to move forward. So there's no you have to be here with your positive negatives in order to graduate. We just want to see the ratio switch so that it lands around 5 positives for every 1 negative. And so if you are very gifted at building relationships and you're gifted at kind of bringing people slowly along a journey, you can get them where they need to be within their culture that they're comfortable with. But there's no one size fits all answer I can give you. It's really dependent on each, family and them communicating and us hearing them and being able to prescribe a treatment that works for their family. But that's, again, not being rigid. And that is one thing, a lot of people in our science are very rigid, and that's cool in a laboratory maybe, but in these situations, in this population, rigidity would absolutely extinguish our presence in this space. We have to be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what I'm hearing reminds me of the way that, early on as behavior analysts, prior to insurance taking over and funding our interventions, that was how we operated. We had to be the salesman of our skills and the salesman of who we are for the families to let us come into their home and work with them. I think that, some of us, long BCBAs who've been in the field for a bit, that was what we had to do to really get ourselves jobs and have families buy into us working with their family. And I think that's something we should, with supervision and train some of the more newer career BCBAs in, is just, humbleism, making sure that we are listening with humility, just treating these clients as people, and making sure that we listen.
Compassion. So there were a lot of talks too at ABAI about compassionate care or trauma-informed care. I'm sure there's a large percentage of people in our universe that have experience some type of trauma, and that changes you. It changes the way that you interact with other humans. So just being kind and slow, I think like we could slow down a bit was helpful.
One of the other things that's in my concerns, I guess, is that you said they have to be in stable housing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be in safe housing, right?
We wouldn't go somewhere that is unsafe. So I don't know, someone where there's actively domestic violence happening while we're there, we wouldn't stay during that.
I think I was thinking more like maybe public housing or maybe public housing where there's gang activity, things like that, where perhaps the system isn't going to be able to move them out of that. Do you guys go into those sort of settings?
Yes, we do. So we don't get, because of the funding type in our contract, we don't get to say like, oh, I don't feel safe going into Section 8 housing. No, we go. We might go during certain times of the day and not other times of the day. But typically, there's one area where we are that has a very heavy gang presence, but thankfully, like, I'm just going to knock on wood to be for sure, but they kind of see people like us coming and they know that they need to like back off until we leave, if that makes sense. So, I mean, thankfully in all these years, we've been pretty lucky.
Does it change any of your targets for, what you're trying to teach the parents in any way?
Well, I mean, if they're living in an unsafe neighborhood or a neighborhood where crime may affect them or their children, I mean, we'd certainly be focusing on how can you protect what's in your control and what's not in your control. So for example, you don't want your child to be running the streets after 6 p.m. when it gets dark out, because that's when we see a higher rate of gang activity. So how can you impact that? Or how can you get your child to focus over here on these goals and aspirations to keep them engaged and busy versus, oh, I want to run around town with all these cool people who are shooting guns and being hooligans. I don't know. So there's no right answer. It's a continuum, and we just hope to swing the pendulum to the side of safety and empower the parents. Like, you can't scream and yell and threaten them and hope that means they're not going to go over here. No, you need to love them and gently bring them and encourage them to be over here. So it's more a process than a quick fix.
Yeah.
So, and we all have to recognize there's only so much we have the power to influence or control.
Some of my sleepless nights were with kids who were older, maybe middle school, who it was very hard, at that point in time when you're doing a preference assessment and you're looking for outcome goals, you're talking about values and what do you want, what are your dreams. And the number of those kids who really could not tell me anything that they wanted out of life. Like, I want to be a blank. Nothing. I would like to one day visit blank. Nothing. So I can't put too much on your shoulders, but I'm curious. I hope that some of your outcomes that you'll be able to track have to do with what happens to the children in adulthood. Have you guys thought about that at all, or have anything like that going?
Yes. The problem is our ability to access that information.
Yeah.
So we're able to access information on them today, as far as what's in our state system. So where DCF tracks abuse reports, provider notes, or services that the kid is receiving. But once they age out of the system, or their family is no longer involved, or they move out of Florida, we don't have access to them. So the only way we know is if the children that are part of the family that we're treating, if those children grew up to have a child to then become involved in the child welfare system, which we've had a couple, where the now mothers used to be our clients, who were like runaways or, behavior analysis clients that we'd work with. And now they're the parents and we're treating their children. But that's, a handful of times in 20 years. So it's just hard for us to access those kids. And we don't collect the kids' social security numbers. unless they're ABA client, therapy clients. But
then you don't have permission to use it later to check, like, if it's
Right.
incarceration or something like that. Okay.
So it's just a little too complex and complicated.
Yeah. I have plenty of unachievable ideas.
Darn HIPAA.
That's right. All right. Well, we are winding up our hour together. Any last thoughts that you'd like to share, or any advice for people who are interested in learning more about this?
I would really just love to encourage people in our field to just not limit yourselves. Being really good at one thing is cool and smart, but being really good at that one thing called behavior analysis that can also do all these other things, like experience that, like open yourself up to that. We always say to our students or the people that work for us, you don't ever want to put yourself out of a job or an ability to help. Like, you got this whole degree, you've worked so hard. If, for example, treating children or persons with autism and related disabilities, if that market gets saturated, what are you going to do? It's going to be like the Hunger Games. That's not pleasant. I say weird things sometimes, but that's not pleasant. Like, you should know how to apply your science everywhere and anywhere. And if you feel passionate, like you, Shannon, right? Like in your heart, like I see that in my heart, like this is what I was meant to do with my life. I know that, just indulge that passion and go help people. And if you need to know how, call me, email me. I'm sure you guys can put my email address in your system, but I'm 100% open to helping anybody always figure this out.
Well,
I would say that people aren't lacking I mean, maybe some are, but I think people are looking to do behavior analysis outside of autism. I think it's the logistics and the salary, to be honest, that is preventing people from taking an alternate route. I had friends who were in OBM and then they went and did case supervision for an autism service provider, because there's not many jobs that are out there for you to be an employee. So then it means that you have to be an entrepreneur, and that can be scary and risky. And not everyone can do that. They may not be in a place in their life, or they may not actually have the resources to start it. Right. I think, Karin, your story is, it was serendipitous almost, right? That you're like how it started, and it's like, okay, here's this. And then you got all these connections and everything. I just think that is oftentimes a rare story for people to fall into. Luck has a lot to play into some of that success, I would imagine.
Yes, I would agree. But I also think the more that we get the message out about what our science can do, people outside of our field will say, gee, that sounds like a great idea. I want to bring that in.
Yeah, that's why I encourage people to maintain their certification, even if they're not providing autism or insurance funded services. So that way other people in other disciplines are like, oh, that was really cool what you did, and that's your certification. I should look for somebody with those credentials. Not everyone would have necessarily that training or experience. And I imagine, Karin, stuff that you guys are doing, there is a wealth of training that someone would need in addition to just standard behavior analytic training, right? Dealing with mental health and substance abuse and stuff like that. There's some nuances there that people really would need to get specific training on. But I agree, for other people to recognize the impact that behavior analysis can have at a wider scale outside of the world of autism, I think we need to do a better job promoting what we can do.
Secret word number 3, incarceration.
Okay. And just because my old ladiness is coming out, 25 years ago, the only way to get a job in the autism services field was to stumble across a family with resources who had heard or read or something, and they hired you to come basically live in their house. So I think, it is definitely by getting the message out there of, hey, look what we can do. Look at what kind of difference we can make, look how much money we can save, as Karin said, is definitely the route to get there. It's just going to be, this is a longer haul, maybe. I don't know, because there's so many other approaches that are already existing, whether they are working as well as we hoped or not, I don't know. But I'm just very grateful that we have the ability to apply this science to so many different places. All right, Karin, thank you so much for talking with us today. And we're definitely going to drop your email in the links so that people can get in touch with you if they would like information about how to become involved. And we will also be listing, if you go, those of you who are going for a CEU, we'll have a page of references and places where you can find all of these different things that we talked about today if you want more information to follow up that way as well. And I never did the CEU spiel today. So, by the way, hang on. You're about to hear a pre-recorded recording to tell you how to get your CEU. But hopefully you have written down all of those secret words and you'll be ready to put those in when you follow the links. Until next time, thanks for watching the Behavioral View.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.